Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. We're opening the webinar room, so letting folks join us as they're able. So we'll wait about 30 seconds and then we'll get started. Glad you're here. We're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Glad you were able to join us today. I know different parts of the state are perhaps having some thunderstorms or some crazy weather. So if you drop your internet connection or the power goes out, don't worry, we'll have these sessions archived and posted. But I'm glad you were able to take some time to join us this afternoon, where we're going to talk a little bit more about strategies for leveraging assessment over the course of the next fall. So this is session 8 of our Launch Nebraska webinar series, so we have 2 more. I did want to just point out a couple of things as we get started. Last week we had really great webinars, the first on supporting students with disabilities, the second around supporting English learners. We have those posted, which includes a link to the presentation as well as the slides. And I get a lot of emails around the tools and templates that are shared as well. So those are up there also. In addition to the case studies, I might mention, folks have really enjoyed reading the case studies. So if those are things you'd want to be able to utilize with your educators as well. One thing I tweeted out last week, right now we've got over 7 hours of free professional learning available on this website, which I think is really, really fantastic. So please share. Think about what it looks like as you are supporting and having conversations with your educators as well. The link to the location where the slides are posted on the screen. And then, as always, feel free to join us on Twitter, either at NDE_TLA or School Kit Group, and use the hashtag #LaunchNebraska. So just a reminder about this webinar series. So our goal, and I mentioned this is 8 of 10, is to provide clear, actionable information around what summer learning might look like, but then also focusing on our attention towards the fall. And like the last 7 times, our partner in these efforts is School Kit. So we're excited to have Ethan with us again today as we jump into today's session. So our focus today is really, as we think about how we are able to leverage assessment for fall to really understand where students are at and how that's going to translate into instruction and the appropriate intervention for students. So I think we know that there's definitely a need to rethink how we approach some of the strategies as we try to understand where kids are at and where we want them to get to. So we're excited to be able to jump right into this today. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Ethan and Jeremy. Jeremy Henniger from NDE is joining us today as well. So Ethan, I'll flip it to you.
Great. Pardon me. Great. Thank you, Corey. Good afternoon, everyone. It's awesome to be back. And, you know, my team has just really and truly enjoyed collaborating with Nebraska educators through the process of this webinar and some work we've gotten to do with Omaha Public Schools and at our Strengthening the Core Summit last summer. So again, I'm Ethan Mitnick. I'm our president and founder here at School Kit. I'm a former special education teacher and a former school principal. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And the image you see here on the screen is an image of story time with Uncle Ethan. Those are my twin nephews, my mom, who's their grandmother, and my niece. And clearly I need to up my reading game. So my niece was very disappointed when I was her reading buddy that night, because after playing with them all day, I actually fell asleep right in the middle of the read aloud. So I'm going to hand things over to Jeremy for those of you who aren't familiar with him, and then we'll move along.
Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Henniger. I'm the Director of Statewide Assessment. I'm a former high school English teacher and curriculum director based in Lincoln most of the time, or Springfield if we aren't going into the office. I realize now that instead for my random fact, I probably should have said really needs a haircut. Yeah, that picture there is from the early days of me teaching. My daughter there, she turns 21 in a month. So that kind of gives you an idea about how long ago that is. So I'm glad to be here and excited to be partnering with the School Kit and NDE and to bring this information to you.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, so just a couple of norms and tips as reminders for this session. We're going to ask folks to use the Q&A feature if you have any questions about technology or about logistics. And please also click escape or go to view options to exit full screen if you want to access the links in your web browser, because we are going to be sharing some documents and resources with you over the course of this webinar and giving you a chance to engage. We'll also prompt you to use the chat bar at different points in the webinar. And just remember that your chats will only be seen by us as the presenters. So we're going to have the chance to narrate some of your responses to the group. And we also, as Corey has mentioned, will make a recorded version of this session available, as well as the PowerPoint deck and all the resources at our www.launchne.com website. So today's agenda, let's get things started. As I'm sure everyone on this webinar knows, we have this great challenge before us, and the closure of school buildings has really dramatically impacted not only teaching and learning, but also assessment. We did not have the chance to administer NSCAS this year and our other traditional end-of-year assessments, and that means we're missing a lot of information about our students' academic progress coming into planning for this summer and this school year. So we're going to talk about some strategies and some resources on this afternoon's webinar that are going to help us make some stronger decisions about instruction, even though we're missing a lot of this important information. This is a slide we've come back to on almost every single webinar, which is this idea that our students are experiencing some very significant unfinished learning this year. Up to 30% of their learning in ELA literacy and up to 50% of their learning in math may go unfinished this year. We also know that, and this slide will probably also look very familiar, that our students need and deserve consistent access to at-grade level content. And our students who are starting the year below grade level are the students who particularly benefit when they have access to on-grade level instruction. And we've also talked a few times now about how important it is to make sure we have high quality instructional materials in place to make sure our students can engage with and be successful with that grade level content. So how can we leverage assessment over this unusual and challenging school year to make sure we're focused on providing access for all students to this on grade level instruction? Well, for one thing, we've got to make a plan. And in this case, we might have to make a few plans. This year, more than ever, it's important for us to have a plan of assessment in place for all students. And that plan should first and foremost support our students to access this at grade level content. We need to avoid using inflexible grouping for our students or misaligned supplementary materials and programs that don't connect back to the academic core. When we make decisions based on assessment, we should be drawing from multiple data sources. And we also have to make sure we have multiple options and contingency plans in place based on how this new school year is shaping up in terms of our back to school scenarios. But before we dive into some of our new learning today, we just want to hear from the folks on this call. So we're going to pop a Zoom poll up onto the screen and give everyone a chance to respond to it. What we want to ask about is whether or not your school system has a clear plan of assessment to start off the school year. So go ahead and answer that poll. Give you about 30 seconds to do that. All right, so I hope folks can see, looks like we have some folks in the middle here disagreeing. We don't have a strong plan of assessment in place, or a lot of folks who actually don't know. So we have a pretty wide distribution here. So again, hopefully by the end of our webinar today, you'll have some strategies and resources you can use to apply back in your school or your school system. So now we're going to get a chance to look at a case study of a hypothetical school system that has made a plan for assessment over the summer and is just beginning implementation during the school year. And remember, this is just one example of what an assessment plan might look like. You're certainly going to be making plans for your unique system based on the needs of your students and your educators. So our case study, again, is a hypothetical district called Prairie City. And our director of assessment named Angela has made a plan over the summer with her colleagues to have to make sure there's a strategic plan of gathering data and information about students' academic progress. Typically, in a typical school year, Prairie City is implementing these assessments. They implement Acadience reading for their K-2 students, and that's generally administered within the first 2 weeks of school. It's focused on early literacy. And they implement the MAP interim for both ELA and math, also during that first 2-week window of school for grades 3 to 8. So now we're going to get a chance to see what Angela decides to do this year. So this is a slightly longer case study because Angela has a pretty involved plan. I'm going to give folks about 5 minutes to read the case study this time. And as you read, you're going to see our tiny URL coming up in our chat bar if you just want to click on that. As you're reading, think about these 2 questions. How does Angela change the way assessments are administered in Prairie City this year? And why do you think she made these changes? And we're going to give you a chance to chat some of your responses up on the chat bar after you have a chance to read. But for now, again, we're going to give you 5 minutes of reading time because we have a pretty long case study, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning and bring us back together shortly. So enjoy your reading, and I'll see you soon. Okay, folks, here's your 1-minute warning. I love that folks are already starting to drop some of their ideas into the chat bar. Feel free to do what Matthew's doing. We'd love to hear your ideas. All right, everyone, let's come back together. Again, we had a longer case study today, but Angela has a pretty substantial plan here. So this is our opportunity to hear from you. So we'd love to hear what you noticed as you were reading the case study in terms of how does Angela change the way assessment typically works in Prairie City during this school year? And why do you think she makes some of these changes? I'm going to give folks some chance to respond right there in the chat bar. And then as responses come in, I'll start reading some of your ideas out with the group. Okay. So she makes the pre-assessments ungraded and targeting unfinished learning. She does delay the MAP test until the 3rd and 4th weeks of school and prioritizes that most important data, narrowing some of those assessments down to be curriculum specific, focus on ELA and math. She wants to make sure the district is hitting the students where they are versus where they should be. I like that. And giving some extra time to students so that there's time to prepare for the test. Ensuring some cross grade level conversations to determine what gaps might exist and what are some of those essential learnings. We're going to talk about essential content more in a few minutes. Finding ways to apply these assessments to the content being taught rather than in separation from the curriculum. I love that one, Megan, thank you. And we're focusing also on topics rather than on scores this time around. And really that collaboration, working together with the assessment department, collaborative work between the assessment department and the curriculum and instruction department. Really, really important. And also that idea of delaying the test for a couple of weeks to give students some time to settle into a routine and build some culture. So thanks all around for your great ideas. Let's take a look at a couple that we want to call out specifically here. So when we look at what Angela decided to do, she decided to actually spend some time looking at the most recent available data that the team had. And that was their winter map interim data from this past year. So she took some time over the summer to revisit and analyze that data to help inform instructional planning for this coming school year. Like we mentioned, she's collaborating with curriculum and instruction to create these pre-assessments to get teachers out of the gate strong, because what teachers need most here is actionable information for teaching Unit 1. We talked about, on our unfinished learning webinars, we talked about how important it is to integrate our interventions as opposed to sort of stopping new grade level instruction and just picking up where we left off. We can't allow that to happen because then our students are just going to fall more and more behind. So I really encourage folks who haven't seen our webinars on unfinished learning in ELA and math to check those out, because you'll really see the connection to assessment. Angela decided to push back the administration of the interims to allow more time for culture building and building routines. This also gives her more time to plan, knowing that this is going to be an uncertain year. We may, for example, have students on site in the school and then have to go through a school closure process again. She also decides to shift the way in which they analyze this fall's interim data. She's really looking for information that's going to inform instructional planning, addressing unfinished learning, and our at-risk students. So lots of changes. We can leverage these tools and resources, but she's really thinking about making some adjustments this year because of the unique situation we find ourselves in. Last but not least, I want to hear from you guys. We're trying to hear lots from you guys on this webinar today. Would love for you to think about your unique school or school system And based on what you read in this case study, what might be a change or two you're thinking about making to your own plan? So I'm going to give folks a moment or two to drop some responses into our chat, and then I'll share some of those out with the group. Ooh, some pre-tests before math units or chapters begin. Pushing back the interim administration for a few weeks. Okay. Any other ideas, things that you are thinking about taking back and using in your unique system? Okay. Taking some extra time to get students into the routine, identifying missed learning or unfinished learning in ELA and math, using our map data differently. Again, holding back for a couple of weeks to make sure folks are in the swing of things. And some ungraded testing to get students to a baseline. Great. Lots of great ideas here, folks. Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to hand things over to Jeremy now, and he's going to talk to you about best practices.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. I appreciate it. So I think overall, a goal of ours is to focus on assessments that provide educators useful information to inform instruction. So in a balanced assessment system, we're going to be focused on those formative assessment processes and interim assessments. Most of what you'll see in this section was informed by a paper from the Center for Assessment. That paper has not been officially released yet, unfortunately, but we will share it with all the participants, or we'll put it out there once it's released, and then we'll send it out to DACs as well through the statewide assessment office. So for today, we have these three overarching areas or high-level areas that we want to talk about for consideration. Leveraging the data you have, ensure there's a clear purpose to interim assessments or all assessments if you plan to use them, and then really how to support teachers in creating pre-assessments that are aligned to those instructional units, instructional shifts that we have within ELA and with math. So first of all, the first thing the paper recommends is to really leverage the data you have. I know a lot of you are out there probably kind of nervous about the information you didn't get at the end of last year, whether that was map growth data or NSCAS data. But the reality is that it's going to be too late really to wait till new data comes in from the beginning of the school year. The fact is, though, that you already have data, and probably more data than you realize. If starting with your last assessments from last year, maybe you gave mid-year map growth tests, or maybe you have district classroom assessments that give you a pretty good idea of where students were at some point in the spring before the instruction was interrupted. Either way, you have data that provides you information that gives you some idea where students were at a specific point in time. You also have trend information that provides insight into what a typical year might happen, or what typically happens with student growth towards the end of the year. You also have information that you can get, if you don't already have, that you can get from teachers about what content was and was not covered during the COVID interruption, and that's going to vary quite a bit from district to district. Additionally, you have information about how students interacted with those learning opportunities. If you had remote learning, were students, which students attended, which students did not attend, which students completed those opportunities. So you may have some really good information there about which opportunities were unfinished and which were partially finished. Additionally, as you can see on your screen, you might have additional information about students that had been struggling throughout the year. You might have information about trends in student performance based on the most important concepts, right? And how those differed from typical years. How will these trends impact what is taught this year is an important consideration. And so you're going to pair that with the unfinished learning from our other webinars to really kind of put all of this together to start the analysis. overall, the paper really talks about districts using all of this information to make hypotheses about where students are and the impact of unfinished learning. These hypotheses can then can inform the plans for the fall. Then when it comes time to assess, whether it's interim assessments or district assessments, whatever they might be, you're really testing those hypotheses and either confirming or refuting those plans. Because once again, it's probably too late to wait for that new data to make plans. You need to start out with plans. Then when that new data comes in, you can adjust or update those plans. And really, this is all you can do. All of this by leveraging the existing data districts have as at least as a place to start. So so overall, we recommend examining all assessments for purposes, right? So this is good practice, whether it's a COVID interrupted year or not. But more important than ever, if you're looking at a balanced assessment system, it's important to have clarity of purpose for each one of your assessments. So as we look at your assessment plan, looking through all of those pieces to make sure that you know why you're giving a particular assessment and that assessment information is going to be used going forward. I often get asked questions about whether a district should continue an assessment or not, and my answer is almost always, well, if you don't use it, you either need to stop or you need to start using that data, right? And so in general, as people are looking at this, thinking about what is the most informative assessments that you have for informing instruction and informing curriculum plans as you move forward. We also don't want to forget about social emotional impacts that may have occurred. And so being careful about when we start these assessments. The last thing we want to do ever is say, welcome back, and then set kids in a seat and say, here's a test we want you to take, right? So being thoughtful about those. We have lots of social emotional learning resources that are out there right now. But this webinar doesn't get into those, right? So, but we want to be thoughtful about those impacts as we continue forward. Like I said, the purpose, if the purpose isn't to inform instruction and to identify students and what they need, then we really should be taking another look at those and say, do we need to do these or not? You know, in general, do you have the ability to use this data? If not, then reconsider whether you give that assessment. In general, we recommend that NDE recommends that the districts continue to use map growth, because map growth is a critical part of that infrastructure to monitor growth and to inform instruction. But if you're new to it and you don't have a good system in place, either build that up over the summer while you have a chance, or maybe consider how you're using it as you move forward. The paper from the Center of Assessment also recommends one of the most important assessments for the return to learning may be the creation of short pre-assessments. These custom-made pre-assessments would be focused on essential learnings from the prior grade level and that what is necessary for the continuation of learning as at the beginning of the year during those first units or first couple of units. We know it's important for students to be exposed to that high-quality grade level material. These pre-assessments should provide instructional insight into important concepts that from last year that may need to be bolstered or reinforced. And grade level content will play a role in making decisions about what should be accomplished. We also know that ELA, or the content, matters a great deal, right? There might be any differences from ELA and mathematics that we discussed in those other sessions. Overall, we know that grade level also might make a difference. These pre-assessments should be highly informed by teacher conversations. What was covered, what was missed, how does it compare to a typical year? And obviously the size and organization of a district is important in how this work is accomplished. If you have an curriculum instruction department and assessment department, how do you work together on that? If you're a small school and you're the only teacher, can ESU cadres be utilized going forward? So those pre-assessments can be tailored, but they're really going to be an important part of that, because it's going to be a part of that formative assessment process. And those should be short and ungraded and as specific as possible for curriculum. So NDE, Nebraska, right, and NWA have a strong partnership, and most districts have a long and strong history of utilizing NWA products to inform instruction and school improvement. And we've been leveraging that partnership in multiple ways to help support Nebraska districts. NWA has provided the national education community with insightful research into the possible impacts of unfinished learning from the spring of 2020. We've also partnered with NWA to help craft the message for this particular webinar. Some things that you want to keep in mind, we have included in this as well, is that MAP growth norms are based on instructional weeks. And so as you look at when you give MAP growth this year, you want to be careful about what information you put into the MAP system about where you are in instructional weeks. If most of the first week of school is about getting to know each other and those social emotional aspects of school culture and those types of things, maybe that isn't an instructional week that you want to count. So be thoughtful about how you go about doing that. Also, we know that there's going to be more variance than ever before in our students. If you have a particular grade level class, there's going to be more variance because of this interrupted learning and this unfinished learning than there have been in the past. So we need to be thoughtful about the data that we use. NWA is also busy creating additional information and resources that can be used as we move forward as well. So one of the things that everybody might want to take a look at is if you haven't been doing student goal setting, this might be a great time to either do student goal setting or renew student goal setting. So anytime we can get students to have ownership of their learning, that's critical. Also know that there's been a whole series of professional learning out there about student goal setting and how to use MAP growth information for student goal setting. And in addition to the existing sessions that we have had over the years, there's also professional learning online resources that can be used for this. And also know that NWA and NDE are working on some expanded professional learning offerings for this summer, later in the summer. For webinars for teachers. That final schedule isn't available yet, but we really want to make additional opportunities. So if you haven't done this, maybe this is a good place to start, or for you to refresh the learning that you already have. We'll also be focusing on some of the formative assessment practices as well that will be available virtually over the end of the summer to help support coming back and helping our students grow from where they are. As always, there's all kinds of ways that interim assessments can be used to support learning, whether that's shifts, comparisons from where students are at the beginning of this year compared to last year, identifying gaps in content instruction from spring 2020, that information in the learning continuum, what can be very helpful. Also creating class level growth goals might be helpful as well. Make all the learning more meaningful and more relevant as we move forward. Here we have some resources for you. So NWA presented a very interesting research about COVID learning loss, or unfinished learning as Nebraska's referring to it. There's a whole webinar out there about that you can click on if you want to know more about NWA's research and the potential impacts. We referenced that earlier in the webinar as well about how those impacts might be different from ELA and math. There's also been a whole series of additional blogs and articles that have been published by NWA's researchers and educators to put information out there to help us as we navigate these uncharted waters of this unfinished learning that's been kind of unprecedented as we move forward. Okay, so now we're going to move into action planning, and hopefully I'm doing pretty good on time here. But we're going to go to this next link. So no matter who you are or what you're doing, it's really important that you're thinking about your plan, right? And obviously plans in Omaha and Lincoln are going to be different than plans in you know, Harvard or Broken Bow, but everybody needs to have that plan. So this is a resource that we have for you. This is probably needs to be customized for your particular set of circumstances, but it's a good place to start. We're going to give you 2 minutes to kind of read over that sample plan right now. We put the URL, the tiny URL in the chat, and we'll give you 2 minutes to take a look at that. About a 45-second warning here. And so we're going to give you another chance to provide feedback to us and maybe to the other participants. So here's a couple of questions for you, and you can put those responses into the chat. So what meaningful existing data can you leverage and review this summer? Once again, that might vary from district to district, from school to school. And who are the most important people you need to collaborate with to implement this plan? Who needs to be at the table, right? So I'm seeing winter map scores. I'm seeing fluency from fall and winter. Teachers from the previous grade should be at the table, right? C&I director should be at the table. Special education should be at the table. School improvement, that's good, school improvement. I'm thinking about that social emotional data. AIMS fluency, ESL teachers, yep. A lot of good support. The ESU support at the table, absolutely. Dual language Spanish teachers. Vertical planning, very good. So if we go to, we have a couple more questions here we want to pose to you, and you can continue to give us responses. What components of the plan you feel are going to be the most difficult for you or to you, and what are you most excited about from this information? If you're excited about any of it, right? Hopefully you are about figuring out how to leverage data and have positive impacts on your students. So let's see if you want to put your answers to that in the chat, we can take a look at those as well. So we had one response there is observing performances from last year and then comparing those to performances this year in a music classroom. It's good. Having a conversation about unfinished learning is exciting as it is not unique to the 2020-21 school year. Absolutely, it's not unique, right? So how can we maybe take some of these lessons and apply them forward, because it's not, unfinished learning isn't new. Yes. Working on pre-assessment has been needed for a long time, and excited about working with teachers on that. As anytime we can get in there and work with teachers about using assessment data is always exciting, and we think that can be good. And also worried about instructional time. I absolutely hear that. Do we have time for these assessments? Oftentimes you have to ask yourself, do you have time not to have the assessment as well? Absolutely. Talking about, Sherry said, I'm debating about how we can best administer pre-assessment. I'm open to the new pre-assessments, but was thinking it would be best to have teachers building pre-assessments into their daily lessons. I'm thinking that might be more impactful. It's a good thought, Sherry. Thank you. Emphasizing formative assessments. Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you everybody for responding and adding those comments and those thoughts. We really appreciate it.
Oh, Jeremy, could I just add one thing into?
Absolutely, please.
In response to, I think Sherry's question was excellent. I think my one response might be thinking of these as pre-unit assessments, because you're really thinking about that arc of learning over a couple of weeks, and what is like some of that major work of the grade from last year that may or may not have been taught. Students may or may not have learned it. So I think a pre-assessment built in to each lesson is quite powerful, but think also of that pre-unit assessment so teachers can really plan for how to adjust for and how to build in some of that prior grade level learning into the current unit so that students can be successful. So thank you for raising that. And thanks, Jeremy, for letting me jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you chiming in there. The paper does a really nice job of laying a lot of this information out for you to see how those pre-assessments can have a positive impact moving forward for this year. So I'm excited when that paper is published to be able to share it with all of you. So we also want to talk about remote assessment options. Of course, nobody's sure what the fall school year is going to, what the school year is going to look like in the fall, right? How we're all going to come together. So it's really important to have contingency plans. So NDE nor any test vendor that I've talked to is encouraging remote or virtual assessment. But it's important to have options, right? And so, and it's also important that we consider every alternative as we move forward. In general, for instance, if we're talking about math growth, we know that it would be better if we could give those in the typical manner that we always do, right? Classroom full of students on their the devices taking that and proctored in person are going to give us better results. So with that being said, we also wanted to make sure that we had guidelines to be able to share with you. And so NWA has been working with and has published guidelines about the possibility of doing remote assessing or virtual assessments in the fall. So if go on to the next slide, please. What we know is if it becomes necessary, right, if it becomes necessary, we want to be very careful about how we use them. For instance, making sure we avoid high stakes decisions should not be made with results from remote testing. Of course, we should be made, any high stakes decisions should be made with triangulation and multiple data sources anyway. But looking at all of those results should be examined with a higher level of scrutiny as we move forward. Once again, this is probably a last resort. Virtual testing, remote testing would be a last resort. but we need to think about that and if it would work for us, if it would not work for us. Obviously, there are big differences in if it would or would not based on your specific district. If it would be a possibility, do you have plans in place to make that work if that would be needed? You know, there's lots of possibilities right now, and so we think that it's important to be thoughtful about whether it would work or not, and then also be making decisions about what does that mean for how we use those results. And so this guidance gets into that, not only about what's the best way to go about virtual testing, but what's the best policy about using that data moving forward. And so we appreciate NWA putting that information together for us. So some additional information here for you. ACT, in addition to, so yeah, we referenced NWA's study earlier. ACT has also been doing some work about studying the impacts of the unfinished learning from the last school year. And so there's a reference to a paper there for you. As always, please check out resources on our assessment homepage. Once again, that paper that we took a lot of this information from, it really did a nice job of kind of coalescing my thoughts and bringing, as I was trying to conceptualize what I would be doing if I was in a district, if I was, and how I would support the teachers and the students in my district, it really helped me think through a lot of the different aspects that I had been thinking about, and kind of brought that all together for me. So I'm really excited about that paper. I thought it was really impactful for me as I read it. It's only about 12 pages, which is right about my length. Otherwise, I fall asleep or something like that and have to pick it up the next day. Just kidding. Anyway, as soon as that paper is available, we'll be putting it on the website with the other Launch Nebraska pieces, but we'll also be sending it out to DACs as well, so that we can, everybody can use that resource, and hopefully it's as helpful to you as it was to me, and helping me solidify my thinking about all of this. And with that, I am going to turn it over back over to Corey to wrap up and to give us a survey.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Ethan. Time flies when you're talking about assessment. So I have a few things as we wrap up. We're going to put a link in the chat box just to a quick survey. We've been trying to get some feedback after each of the sessions. So if you have a couple of seconds and can do that, that would be great. I wanted to talk just about a couple of resources that are available and that were mentioned. So on Friday, I sent out to district curriculum contacts a resource that was developed by student achievement partners in response to the current pandemic. So what student achievement partners did for K-8 literacy, literacy and mathematics, I'll have to get the grades, I think it's K-8 mathematics and K-12 literacy, is they identified essential content for the 2021 school year. A couple of things I want to point out is that this was developed in response to the pandemic, and this does not prioritize individual ELA or mathematics standards, but it prioritizes content. So if we're expecting there may be some disruptions over the course of the next school year, what they worked to try to do was to identify the essential content for literacy and mathematics for that next school year. The other thing that I thought was really interesting and helpful in this is they worked to embed the social emotional learning pieces into the academic work. I don't know about you all, but as we're having conversations about reentry, one of my fears is that we're putting SEL aside from content. And so what we're trying to do at NDE is really make sure that those content and SEL considerations are linked. And the document does that for you. Now, one of the caveats I might mention is that this resource is designed around the Common Core state standards. So what that means is that over the next few weeks, NDE staff is working to customize the guidance and make sure there's alignment to Nebraska ELA and mathematics standards. I offer this at this point because I wanted to get it in the hands of curriculum folks as soon as possible, even though it's currently aligned to the Common Core. I think what it will help districts and ESU staff do is to begin to think about the instructional implications for those particular grade levels. That, coupled with the webinars that we've done on unfinished learning in ELA and mathematics, and thanks for mentioning those, both Ethan and Jeremy, I think is a really nice tie to understand where we anticipated students to be in mid-March, what we were able to get them through in April and May, and then thinking about the assessment strategies as we really begin building individualized instruction plans. So the link is in the chat box. It's the pre-publication version. It is public. It's just not on their web. But I wanted to make sure that you all had it, and also know that if you're listed as a curriculum contact for your district, it was sent to you via email, and more information will be coming. So along with that, the other thing I wanted to mention is we are still building out our academic and instruction guidance as part of Launch Nebraska. This will include considerations for assessment, instructional materials, and professional learning. And I know folks want it yesterday, but because of how it's so interconnected to schedule and to staff and to social emotional learning, we are making sure to take some time with it. So be on the lookout here within the next several weeks for more specific guidance around reentry supports as it relates to the academics. Jeremy mentioned a couple of times the resource coming out from the Center for Assessment. It is using, this guidance utilizes that resource as we think about considerations for assessment as a way to determine individualized instructional plans. So stay tuned, and if you have questions or needs, in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us. Certainly, Jeremy and his team are ready and willing to help. I also want to acknowledge our great partners in NWEA. I think we're really thankful to be able to leverage the support that they provide our districts in this space, and how we can really continue to leverage the direction we were going in assessment, but use it in a way that is reflective of the current situation. With that, I'm going to preview what's coming up. So if you haven't had enough fun with literacy and mathematics, know that we're going to switch to talk about science. I really don't want to lose science in this conversation as well, especially in the summertime. So I've asked Dr. Sarah Cooper, our former science specialist, to come back and lead a webinar for us on Thursday around supporting independent science learning. And that leads us to session 10 a week from today, where we're really going to talk about planning to pivot and thinking about, in light of what we've experienced over our professional learning the last several weeks, what does that mean towards fall, and some of those other considerations that you might be thinking about. It also leads right up to the Future Ready conference, so I just want to put in a plug. I know a lot of folks are thinking about digital delivery, what that means for the materials that you have. Not all instructional materials are created equal as you're making plans for digital instruction. So Future Ready Conference offers some great tips and tools that you might be able to utilize. And with that, we're going to end just a few minutes early. So we'll stay on for a little bit as folks finish out with the survey. And hopefully you'll have a great, not weekend because it's only Tuesday. Have a great evening. And we look forward to seeing you back here on Thursday to talk about science. Appreciate it.